Hi, everyone. I guess there are still some people who finished lunch late. Thanks to be here for this talk. Last year, I was there for the first edition, 400 people. This year, more than 900. That's amazing, really. So that's great. I'm super happy about that. I'm Nicolas Frankel. I was a developer, actually. For more than 17 years, I did help people by consulting customers with Java and Spring and all that stuff around it. And some months ago, I changed my career, and now I'm developer advocate. I work for a company called Exoscale. And Exoscale is a European cloud provider who is already using the cloud here. Not that many people, perhaps 30%, OK? Who is using Amazon? Yeah, nearly everyone. Just be very careful if you are using any of the American company, because if you contract with an American company, the data, wherever it's located, wherever the data center is located, basically the US government can legally access it through the Cloud Act. If you are like a European-based company, it conflicts with GDPR, and you might be liable. So be very careful about that, and just check the European provider. Exoscale is one of them. We have others. So to the subject. This talk is called Zero Downtime. So why should you do zero downtime? The first reason is pretty simple, because everybody does it. If you're an engineer, probably you don't want to put a static web page and let other people see that you don't have the skills to do zero downtime. Probably you want to go to places where other engineers already implemented zero downtime, or perhaps you want to implement it yourself because you think that it makes a lot of sense. The second reason is users, they start expecting it more and more. If you are a Facebook user, if you are a Gmail user, Google user, try to remember the last time you saw a static web page saying, hey, please wait, we are upgrading our software, come back in a few minutes. Never happens. Those guys, they are doing zero downtime. And because you as a user are using this application, but everybody does, then this expectation starts to grow among all users for all software. So if you are still doing the old stuff or putting a static web page and asking people to come back, they might say, why? If Amazon puts a static web page, people will go shop somewhere else. And the final reason is, every time you put a static web page, users cannot interact with your application. And in e-commerce, again, for Amazon, it's a direct revenue loss. So for all those reasons, I think that it's a very important thing to do zero downtime. But you already know how to do it in general. Because this pattern, blue-green deployment, who knows about blue-green deployment? Yeah, half the room. We already know it seems sometimes. So basically, you have a green environment. This is production. And you have this blue environment. This is pre-production. And you want to upgrade the pre-production for the new version. And when you are ready, magically, blue environment becomes production. This is pretty simple, right? I've been an architect. That's how we do stuff. We draw arrows, and it's very simple. But perhaps you will tell me, but what if there is a change in the database schema? Doesn't work anymore. Yes, we have two separate databases. Yeah, but what if, in that case, how do we migrate the data? OK, then just use the same database. Again, very simple. It just works. But now thinking about that, there might be a couple of issues, right? The first issue is In my previous example, this is how I changed the router. Actually, in the physical world, it doesn't work like that. There might be some delay between the time you say, OK, let's do it, and the time it's actually done. So this routing stuff, we don't know how it works. It's just nice on a diagram, but there might be a couple of issues around it. And so what about the people who are already using the environment? They are already on green, and then you tell them that they should use blue. They are lagging behind. What you should do with them? And the final problem, as I already mentioned, is a database. It's always the state that's the problem, because you have one out of two options. Either you have two separate databases, and then what about migrating data from one to the other? Or you have one single database, and then how do you handle database schema changes? So this way doesn't work that well, actually, blue-green deployment. But now we have Kubernetes, and Kubernetes, as you know, will solve all your problems, right? Who is already using Kubernetes? Keep your hand in the air if you're using it in production. OK, so perhaps 10%, 15%. With Kubernetes, we have this thing called rolling updates. And the principle behind it is quite easy. You have like multiple nodes in a cluster, because, I mean, my previous schema was a bit of an oversimplification, since there is like not only one single node, but probably multiple nodes. And so you update them one by one. And with Kubernetes, it's just everything in YAML, because this object, this resource, is called deployment, and it's already readily available. So basically, you just specify two parameters, max surge. Oh, there is a bit lagging. Max surge and max unavailable. And max surge is the number of extra pods that you allow Kubernetes to spawn. And max unavailable is the number of pods that you allow like Kubernetes to kill to do your deployment. And I've created a nice schema for that. So in T0, you have like 3 replicas of your application. V1, and because we have max unavailable 0 and max surge 1, that means we can allow 1 extra pod. So what we do in that case is not we, but Kubernetes create this extra pod and uses the V2. And because we still have 3 replicas, then it removes one of the V1. And then it adds one more with V2 and removes one of the V1 until at the end, you only have V2 pods. On the opposite side, you can set the max unavailable to 1 and the max surge to 0. So basically, you live on constrained resources. And then in that case, you start with 3 V1 pods. You remove one of them, then you can spawn one more, which is V2, and then you remove one of the V1, blah, 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 until you've got all your 3 pods that are V2. And if you combine them, then it gets much faster. That's the power of Kubernetes. Everything is fine. OK, but actually, the application, they don't start instantly. And the problem, if you think they start instantly, you might redirect traffic to a pod that is starting. And if you do that, actually, you will send the traffic. Sorry, I have a problem with my mic. You will send the... Sorry for that. Better like this? Who can still hear me? OK. Who thinks this is better than the... Yeah, OK, thanks. You can tell me stuff. OK, so basically, you need to tell Kubernetes needs to know that the pod is ready to serve requests. And in order to do that, well, if you are using Spring Boot, it's easy. If you are not using Spring Boot, you can do it by hand, but Spring Boot offers something called the actuator. Who is already a Spring Boot user, by the way? Not everybody, okay, 80%. Who knows about the actuator? Everybody who is using Spring Boot knows it. Okay, that's cool. So if you are using Spring Boot, there is the actuator, and it offers an endpoint, automatic endpoint that knows about the state of the application, and it knows about the health of the application. So if the application can respond, then it can send requests to it. So basically, on one side, you've got Kubernetes who can, you can point it to an endpoint to tell about the health, and Spring Boot offers that. So basically, they are a perfect match. They match perfectly for that. And this is, again, in the YAML, you can configure something called the readiness probe. It offers a get endpoint. You just need to point to the URL of the actuator. This is a default URL and the default port, and it's done. Everything is fine. And in general, that's where most talks stop. Everything is fine. Kubernetes saved the world. Hey, just do it, and you will be happy. However, you probably noticed that I was a consultant, so I was bullshitting you all the time. Actually, what I did is I conveniently forgot about the state, about the database. If we do the same thing with the database, what will happen? We start our rollout, and it doesn't work anymore because we have an incompatible database scheme change. So Kubernetes doesn't handle that, of course. So let's say that what we could do is we can make the software compatible with databases changes. So now, what we can do is, let's say that our application 2.0 can work with 1.0 schema, which is good. So we roll out, and now everything is fine. But sometimes bad stuff happens to good people, and we need to roll back. Oops. And it doesn't work anymore. But of course, you never roll back, right? Because everything works from the first time. So it's time to think about a better strategy for that. So what we could do is actually, if there is an incompatible database schema change, we can break this huge change into a small series of compatible changes that are compatible side by side. How does it work? Well, I will take a very simple use case, actually, and this use case is I'm not a super good database administrator, so I created my model, and I put everything in one table. And at one point, even though my database model was very bad, my application was super successful, and I need to put the data into two different tables with a one-to-one relationship. That's a very incompatible database schema change, right? So I have this super bad model where I put everything into one table, and even if there are students among you, you probably understand that this is not good because I am mixing two different things. So I want to put everything that is related to the address into their separate table. Okay, works for you? I would assume it's a yes. How can we do that? Well, we will decompose this huge change into 3 different steps, again, that must be compatible side by side. The first step is we will create this new address table, and every time we do a data change, like insert, delete or update into the person table, we mirror this into the address table. Still, the application continues to use the person table every time. If we roll back, that means that the address table, we can remove it, it's not used, we don't care, everything is fine. The second step will be actually to use the address table as a source of truth. But then it's the opposite that happens. Every time we make changes to the data inside the address table, we will mirror the change in the person table. If we roll back, the address table won't be used, but still we have all the data we need in the person table. The third step would be to stop copying the data, and finally, anytime you want, you can clean up. It can be through the application or through anything. Do you agree with that? I will assume it's a yes again. And though Spring Boot can help us with that, but by default, Spring Boot will create the schema out of your model, and it will also update the schema according to your model. So we want to disable that. We want to handle the schema ourselves. And for that, it's very easy. We just say, stop doing that, and we will delegate it to something else. And in that case, I'm using Flyway, but you can use Liquibase as well. They are both integrated into Spring Boot. It's just that Flyway, I'm a bit more familiar with it. And Flyway, basically, if you are not using it even without zero downtime, you should think about it. Actually, it's how you version your database schema changes. Because nothing is worse than having like your schema in production and you don't know what changes were applied to get to this point. You don't know how to like reconstruct it. So you have this thing called Flyway to handle that, and Flyway, like very, very quickly, is based on a concept called a migration. And my migration is just a SQL script. So you need to write the SQL yourself, but it's not a big issue in general. And every migration has a version number, and the version number, they should be ordered, of course, so v1, v1.1, v1.2, v2, whatever you want. And Flyway will try to apply them in order. Every time it applies a migration, it will like record it in its own table inside your database. And if a migration has already been done, then it won't be applied a second time. So it's very straightforward. And if you are using Spring Boot with Flyway, you just put your scripts, your migration, into a specific folder, SSC main resources, db/migration, and at the beginning, at the startup time of the application, then Spring Boot will apply them. And again, if they are already been applied, Flyway will skip. What you shouldn't do is once you have applied a migration, you shouldn't change the script because the hash of the script is also recording in the table, so Flyway will stop working and will tell you that you did something very, very bad. Well, there are two different ways to handle the mirroring. One is through the DB, through triggers, and one is through the code. Since I had already told you I'm not super good at the database side, I chose to handle everything through the code. And for that, I first started to use like GTPA listeners. They don't work super well with Spring. Actually, it's very hard. Well, it's not possible to inject them. They are created directly. So I had to fall back to the implementation detail, which in that case is Hibernate. And Hibernate has a super rich event model where you can listen for events, subscribe, and then do something when that event happens. And I think that I've talked a lot, and it's time for some demo. So the application that I want to show is like not super mind-blowing. It's just a very simple Spring Boot application. I have the application itself. I have a controller. And this controller allows me two things: to get stuff from the database and to insert new stuff into the database. In that case, the stuff is a person entity. And because it should have started by now, or no, I should have like done it before. This is Kotlin, but there is nothing mind-blowing about it. So now, if I go on localhost 8080, now you can understand why I was a developer and not a designer. I have this new application. I've already created some data. When I look here, I have created the data. So this is a Flyway migration. This is version like 1.something, 1.0 actually. And I can like add a new data, and this is how it works. So this is, I'm locally running that. Here is just not because I love myself, but because it's my host name, and this is a version. And for the rest, it will be very useful. So the first thing that we need to do is to deploy it on Kubernetes is to create a. Guys, you are not super responsive. It's not the first question I asked, but here I cannot assume yes or no because it's not a black and white question. If I want to deliver that on Kubernetes, what should I do? Come on. Creating YAML, yes. But the problem, if I want to create a YAML file, what should I deploy? Docker file, thank you, someone help me. And because I'm super lazy, I don't want to create a Docker file, actually. So instead of creating a Docker file, what I'm using is something called gib. And if I'm showing you the POM, and I encourage you to have a look at it, like out, there is a Maven plugin, and even Gradle, if you love Gradle, but in that case, you just lost my respect. Sorry about that. Please cut the recording at this time. It's not good. You can like plug this in, and basically the gib plugin provided by Google automatically knows how to create a Docker image out of your project. So you don't need to actually create a Docker file by hand. So this is, I mean, if you are in a hurry, if always you do the same stuff, it's very, very useful. There are two targets. One of the targets sends the image to a Docker Hub registry, well, to a Docker registry, which by default is Docker Hub, sorry, or you can send it directly to the local Docker daemon, which is my case here. And at this point, as you mentioned, I create my YAML file, and now I have to check the revision. And my YAML file, actually, there are twofold. One is about the database. In the initial version that I showed you, actually, I was using H2 embedded. Now I'm using H2 server, so I need something for that. Should I go into the specifics of what I did here? Who knows enough about Kubernetes? Who doesn't understand that at all? One hand, two hands, more hands, and shy people. OK. So the first thing is about the namespace, because as a developer, you don't put everything into the same package. Here, it's the same. You should put every one of your application or related stuff into their own namespace. So that is pretty standard. The second thing is because by default, you cannot access anything inside a Kubernetes cluster, you need to provide an entry point into the cluster from the outside. Since I will be doing everything locally, I'm using a service of type node port. I don't see it anymore here. Whoops, sorry. Of type node port. And the final stuff that I'm doing is actually like deploying the database. Okay? I will do that, and meanwhile, I will show you the rest. So this is probably big enough, clear. So kubectl dash, I'm not in the right stuff. cd 0 downtime, no. 0 downtime, and now I'm in the right place. So I kubectl apply dash f, and it's called database.yaml. Great, now it's done. So it's deploying my stuff, and meanwhile, I can show you the rest. So this is null is the same. I've declared a namespace. I've declared a service because I want to access my application. And the meat of that is what I showed you in the beginning. I've created a resource called, well, I will create a resource called a deployment. And it has 3 replicas. And the rolling update will be like, I will just like remove one pod before creating another one. And it will be my like first image. Okay? Let's do that. What I can check is kubectl apply, logs application, no, application, okay, this one, not anymore, kubectl get pods. This one is the running, no, sorry, again, watch. One of them is starting, I don't know which one. So what I will check is how does it work on the H2 console. I need to get access to the IP of the cluster. So normally it should be this one, and I need to get So actually, it was raining today in Portugal. This was a bad omen. And if I remember, it must be 3. Yes. And now what I need to do is just like copy-paste my application.yaml. This is this one. This is the H2 console, which tells me that actually it has already passed the first script and created this Flyway schema history. So if I do that, it tells me that I've already, like, the first node, the first pod story that started actually created the migration, executed the migration. And now if I go on my application itself, not this one, perhaps this one. Yes. So here I have the node. I'm on this pod, and this is the first version. So everything should be working. I will add a new stuff, a new person. Gen2 is my friend. Everything works. So now the point is to migrate and to separate the person, because the person table is not very nicely handled, as I mentioned before, is to separate into 2 different tables. And remember, the first step is to create an address table and to just mirror everything every time. That's the first step. So because I'm super lazy and I cannot code by heart, I will just check out the revision that I want. And I've added a new script. So this new script is the v2.1 migration that should be applied at the first startup of a node. That creates a table address. And on the code side, I have created this address entity. And as I mentioned, I've created a listener that every time a person is inserted, then it will create an address line at the same time. So mirroring. So to apply that, I will just go to my application. I will say 2.1, and I will apply this migration by applying that. So now I can kubectl get pods watch, and I see that already here I've created a new pod running. And now normally, if I'm very, very fast, I can, yeah, oh, it killed the pod I was on, so now I'm still on a 1.0. I'm doing refresh every time. I don't have any sickness yet, it's just that I'm trying to refresh. And of course, it's always the last pod that gets killed. Okay, meanwhile, we can check that the address table has been created. And yes, see? So, because I'm using, that is very important, a stateless application, basically, now I'm using a new pod that is upgraded to 2.1. The next step is, remember, to move the source of truth from the person to the address. So again, I check out. I have this new script. And what I need to do with this script is basically to copy the existing data from the person table to the address table. I forgot before that to create a new entity with this schema. So and we can check what happens. Like if we check the person, like the person table right now, it has everything. And if we check the address table, it has only the entity that I just created. So during the 2.2 migration, I need to copy the data from person to address. I get back to my application.yaml, which I don't find. No, not this one, this one. And I will apply this change. And I can watch the pods again, getting happy to be killed. Not this one, this one. So here, I'm still running on v2.1. Everything is fine. Perhaps we can check whether the migration has been applied. If we check the address, now we should have 3 lines. Yes, we have 3 lines. So the first pod started and applied the migration. But meanwhile, this one is still running. Everything is fine. And because the changes are compatible, I could still write here. So you see, I'm still having this zero downtime stuff. And perhaps what we can do now is like rollback, because I promised you that with rollback it still works, right? So let's do it. So now, normally, it should be much faster because there is no migration necessary, because every migration were up until 2.2, and here we have the highest version is 2.1. So basically, Flyway will decide, oh, there is nothing necessary, and everything will be fine. And here I'm 2.1. I can still create new entities. It still works. I forgot to create a 2.2. An entity in 2.2, so I will just reapply it here. So every insert I make is compatible with the previous and the next version. Again, here I don't need anything. No migration are necessary because the version 2.2 was previously applied. And I create a version with 2.2. Everything is fine. So, any questions about the demo itself? No, you didn't change since last time. You are still asleep. Sorry about that. So, conclusions of this talk. If you want to do zero downtime, first, it's not like an unachievable target. I hope that I proved that it was possible, not only with like Hello World application, but for real application that use databases. Because every time you want to do zero downtime, you must like think about the state. State handling is very important. So with the database schema change, it's possible. You can also tell me about the session. What about the session? Well, we already did that before. It was called like you have Spring Session with Redis, and it works super well. Don't worry about that. I think there are also OpenShift that offers that out of the box. So first takeaway, it's possible. You can do it right now. But it's far from free. That means that you need to think, and that's the worst in our industry, about the return over investment. You don't do zero downtime because it's cool. You don't do it because your user wants it. You do it for a specific reason, and the only reason is that by doing zero downtime, you are basically spending less money than if you weren't doing it. And the most important takeaway is that it involves everyone. It involves not only the guy who is deploying, the pool Kubernetes administrator, it involves the developers. Because only the developers know about the impact of their code change. Only the developers know about the impact of their databases schema changes. And only the developers know which step they need to take to make a huge non-backward compatible change into a small series of compatible changes, side by side, again, side by side. You can check my blog for more information. You can follow me on Twitter. And if you want to do the same demo that I have done here at home, very nicely, then you can check the Git repository because I try to provide such a repository always. And now, if you are perhaps more interactive, there is time for some questions. Or not. Come on, guys. There are a lot of you. One question. Everything was super clear? I cannot believe that. Oh, there is one question. Thank you very much. Come after me. I have chocolate for you.
A question about the Flyway migration. How does it work, because it's part of the deployment, how does it work when there's a lot of data that needs to be migrated? Can you batch it? Can you split it up into pieces? Will it affect the deployment?
That's a good question, actually. So I don't have enough experience in this area, but I know about the problem. Here, I showed you that it was super easy to migrate because I had 4 lines of data. So let me get back to my IDE, which, yeah, thanks. Here, this is the migration. Yes, thank you very much. This is a migration script. So again, first I checked it on the internet because I have no clue what it exactly does. It's just like works for sure. And if you have like 4 lines of data, yeah, you don't care that much. If you have more data, yeah, yes, it becomes a problem. So the good thing about migration is basically the first pod that starts will lock the Flyway migration schema, and we'll start applying the stuff. And meanwhile, your other pods, they don't care that much. They can still continue working. But if this migration takes a long time, then this like first pod that starts will do the work might not work out that well. And I leave up to your creativity to find good solutions to that, because I've thought about that. And since I've not been like confronted with the problem, I didn't came up with like a solution that I could tell you, hey, you should do this. So it's a really good question, and if you find a solution that works in your context, please contact me. I will be interested in how you solve that. Yeah, I was a very bad consultant because actually I don't bullshit people. When I don't know, I don't know. Other questions? Yes, gentleman here has a question. I hope I can answer this one. Make it easy, please. Otherwise, it's live streamed. Everybody knows that I cannot answer a question, and it doesn't work that well afterwards.
Yeah, hello. Nice talk, thanks.
Thanks.
My question is related to, so this works, but it seems like a very manual process. We are in a world that everything we do is based on CI/CD, automation. So this process seems that we have to do many releases until we can have a stable version in production, for example. So if you have manual gates for approval, etc., this doesn't seem very viable. How do you see that?
Actually, on that, I must push back. I think this is viable. What would happen in a CI/CD is exactly the same. Like instead of just like making kubectl apply, what would you do is you would create a new version that would get built, that could get stored on your Artifactory or wherever, and after a while, we'd get like deployed to, depending on your stuff, either to staging or to pre-production, or directly to production but with a canary release or whatever. At one point, you need to make sure that this works, like version 2.1 works. The testing can be automated, it can be manual. That's not my issue anymore. Probably you should use the same process that you are using right now. After you make sure everything works, then you can apply the second change. Again, you push, it builds, it's pushed to whatever environment. And then you can check that everything works. And so on and so forth until the last step where you say, okay, it's done. The good thing is that every time you deploy something and it doesn't work, you can roll back one step. But you will be, again, it's a technical step. The step is still the database change. So you are stuck in the middle of the process. It's not completely foolproof. But it's still better than just hope that everything will work. But I hope that at this point, normally, every bug should have been identified in previous environments. So the fact that I'm using kubectl apply, or you are doing the same with your CD pipeline, it's the same.
Yeah, when I was saying manual steps, it was more related. My end goal is to deliver something to production.
Yes.
But to achieve zero downtime, I have to do more than one release.
Yes, yeah. True.
So it's a trade-off.
Yeah. Yes. Again, the thing is, you cannot do everything at one point because you want zero downtime. Yeah. And the only way to have zero downtime if you have the, schema changes is to have little steps. There is no such thing as a free lunch. And again, the real problem is not the multiple releases. The real problem is the fact that it involves a lot of effort on the side of developers. Now imagine, this is one simple, well, simple, not so simple, but this is one change in the master branch. Now imagine that you have like a lot of people working in branches on the same product because, yeah, for whatever reason, you are not being convinced by microservices. And this needs to be done for every branch. And it might be hard to do them like in parallel, so you might do them in series. This is life, sorry.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Other questions? Yes or no? No, he was just playing with his friend. I thought the same, actually. No more questions? One question here at the gentleman on my left. Yeah, it's a big room, huh?
Hi, just a small question. So you mentioned microservices. What happens if we have 10 microservices using the same database with different versions?
I think the answer is in your question. The answer is in your question. If you are having microservices that use the same database,
maybe not the best idea.
I think it's not really microservices compatible. I mean, one of the tenets of microservices is every microservice has its own database. If you are telling that this is microservices, I'm sorry, you must tell your team leader or your architect that is completely mistaken. He is not doing microservices. He's just doing the stuff that we did like 10 years ago. We have multiple applications and one big database. You know, it's like if you say you are agile, but you have like a project manager that now is a scrum master. It doesn't work. You must change stuff, really. This is only cosmetic. So the answer lies in your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's a good answer. Thanks.
Thank you very much.